Dave Hamilton is here with us, everybody. Dave Hamilton, co-host, I should say, of Mac Geek Gab and some other shows that we'll talk about this week. Also, one of the founders of the Mac Observer. So yeah, I changed the music on Mac OS X today. Well, a couple of days ago, as people hear this.
Is that the first music change you've ever made to Mac OS X?
God, no. But it's the first one in 5 years. No, I used to change it about every year and a half to 2 years. Had my friends, The Famous, let me use their music at first. And then for about 6 months, back when podcasting was still the Wild West, I think I changed to Dragula by Rob Zombie. And then one day I woke up and I was like, I don't want to get sued by Rob Zombie. So I switched to something else. I can't remember what was next. But yeah, Key Theory, the guy from Key Theory, whose name escapes me right this minute, which I feel terrible about, I think Kyle, he wrote to me one time and he was like, hey, would you like to use my music? And I was like, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much. And then Vernon Reid was kind enough to let me use one of his songs from one of his albums one time.
Nice.
I think it was from Other True Self. And then one day I was like, I'd like to use some Cracker music. And so I wrote to Cracker's website thinking, eventually this might eventually get up to somebody. And David Lowery wrote to me like 30 minutes later. He's like, you're not making money off your podcast, are you? And I was like, well, yes, because of ads. And he was like, yeah, it's fine. So they let me use their stuff. And then about 5 years ago, I just used a piece of production music. And after 5 years, I'm now just using another piece of production music. So
you just proved to me that David Lowery isn't always a curmudgeon. That's great. That's good to hear.
David Lowery, he was really cool, actually. He was very nice. I mean, we have not had any kind of interchange except for literally one day. One day I wrote to him and said, I have loved your music for a long time. I've been playing with this. Would you mind if I do it? I think I sent him a sample of what the beginning and the end would sound like because it was 2 songs. It was I'm a Little Rocket Ship and 100 Flower Power Maximum, I believe, were the 2 songs. So I sent him a sample and he was like, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. So let's play today's game.
Let's do it.
So this is one of the sort of recurring features. If somebody has never been on the show before, then they do this. So it's not a recurring feature to them, but it's a recurring feature for the show. This being your first and a half time, given the shows that we did earlier this week that nobody's ever going to see, including us.
It feels like a recurring feature to me, but
it does.
It's not actually.
I'm kind of excited about you playing Wheel of Stuff later this week, because though nobody is going to get your answers that you gave before, I'm going to get whole new answers from you. And you're going to be the first person to play that game twice.
Interesting.
Sadly, only broadcast one time. What's your Apple story? This is the thing that we do. Like, a lot of people know you from Mac Geek Gab. A lot of people know you from Gig Gab. A lot of people know you just from years around Macworld and your work with TMO and with Backbeat and stuff like that. We all know that we're all Apple people, but we don't all know our Apple stories. I'm curious, Dave, to hear yours.
Yeah. So, as a kid, I was interested in computers. We had a Timex Sinclair for a little while. And then our first real computer in the house, by my opinion, was an Apple IIc. And I was an Apple fan before that. The 2C wasn't just some surprise. I mean, it was a surprise, but the fact that it was an Apple was most definitely my wish. I had used PET computers, the Commodore PET, at school. I had used some various versions of IBMs and that sort of thing, but I really, our school had a couple of Apple IIes. And I would occasionally be able to take those home on the weekends, and so I really started building up some familiarity with the Apple and the Apple II specifically. And so I was like, okay, yeah, this is what I would love to have. I already had a library of software for it, so then we finally got the 2C. That was outstanding. It was a weird machine to work with, but it forced me to learn and get really geeky with how serial ports worked when I wanted to finally connect it to a modem, and that actually paved a path for me in my life. This wacky serial port problem. It was a DIN 9 serial port on the back of the 2C, and I had to learn how to build a serial cable to match it to a DB25 port for a modem. And the 2C would reverse send and receive at times, so I had to build the cable the right way. All very complex, but it taught me that bullheaded persistence could solve problems on a computer because there was no one to call, right? And that really paved my way for essentially doing what I do now, which is answering questions, people's questions on Mac Geek Gab. But also in the interim, I was a computer consultant for many, many years. And I really feel like, that time with the 2C set that foundation for me. But that's how I got into the Apple side of things. And then when I was about to go off to college, I decided I wanted to get a Mac. So I wound up getting a Mac SE30 before I went off to school. And that was my first exposure to the Mac, which was very, very different from the Apple II. It was very closed architecture compared to the Apple II, but in a good, what turns out to be a good way. So yeah, so that's the beginnings of that story. I used to go to Macworld Expos all the time as an attendee. I went to many, many Apple Fest shows as an attendee. And then Brian Chaffin came to me one day. Brian is my co-founder at the Mac Observer and, is our editor-in-chief and all of that. We both worked with another company called Computer Nerds. I was a junior partner at this company. Things didn't work out well with me and the senior partner. We were better friends than we were business partners. So he bought me out, and it was all good. But I was still doing some work there. Brian had a company that he had acquired, and Brian and his team were in the office. We would talk Macs because Brian was a Mac guy. And so one day Brian came to me and he said, this website I've been writing for called Webantosh wants to sell. And he said, I want to buy it, but I don't have the money. I know you just sold your interest here. And would you be interested in partnering with me? He says, really, it's not even just the money. He says, I need, I want a business partner. And so I was like, oh, yeah, sure. I had some free time on my hands. And so we started the Mac Observer. It really, in my mind, it was never going to be more than a very, very side hustle kind of thing. Yep. 21 years ago. Yeah. Of course, it it turned out to be so much more than that, and then it spun off into Backbeat Media and what I do with Mac Geek Gab and all of that stuff. So
let me ask you a question. 21 years ago, you start this thing about Apple and the Mac. How prepared were you for it to die? Because 21 years ago, there was absolutely no guarantee that Apple was going to be around. I think it had already gotten its lifeline from Microsoft at that point, but the lifeline was literally a lifeline. It wasn't like, here's a significant investment from this company. It was, I'm going to give you enough to get by for a bit. There was no guarantee that Apple was going to be, there was not only was there no guarantee that Apple was going to be the most valuable company on the planet, back and forth with the biggest oil company on the planet, there wasn't even a guarantee that Apple was going to be around. How prepared were you for this to go, belly up?
Oh, the app. We assumed Apple would. There was some part of us that assumed Apple would not make it. Mm-hmm. You're right. We did this, and I never even thought about it at the time, which shows how naive I might have been. But Apple had just taken, I think the prior summer, had just taken their 150 million or whatever it was from Microsoft. And like you said, that wasn't really all that much money in terms of what Apple needed. It was, you can make payroll for a couple of months kind of thing, and that was maybe it, maybe not even that far. But it was December when it all finally came together. It was fall of 98, I want to say. Yeah, something like that. Sure. And yeah, it was, we assumed, we believed in Apple. I always believed in Apple. I knew they made the better product. At that point in time, it was compared to, PC clones or whatever. But Mac clones were very much a thing right then. And in fact, that was a big part of Apple's cash flow problem, was they were building all this technology and then other people were selling it for far less. And so it was a major issue. As I understand it through the grapevine, in fact, Power Computing banked on that. The whole reason they wanted to become Apple clones, according to people that whisper, was that Steve Kang said, what would be great, Apple does not want this to happen. They should not let this happen. But if we can get a license from them and really do well with it, they'll buy us out of our license at the end. And that's exactly what happened. So whether that's revisionist history or what, it's an interesting way to look at the story. But yeah, so we had a thing, in fact, for many, many years, and occasionally we get the opportunity to put another entry into what we called the Apple death knell counter. And that was, back then, it was probably, 1 to 3 times per month, we had some story from someone else that was like, Apple's going to die. And Brian would write it up and put it in the Apple death knell counter.
Yeah.
And So yeah, we expected it would die.
What's gotten insult to injury is now every few months somebody will still say, here's what holding on to your Apple shares from the day that Michael Dell said they should give back the money and apologize. Or somebody actually ran one recently. I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was TMO, but somebody, might have been Mac Daily News, ran one the other day that was like, here's how many times larger Apple is than Dell. And I'm like, come on. Yeah. He was young. It was a long time ago. Apple going under was a fairly safe bet. I made fun of that for a long time, but it's been a long time. Michael Dell's got his own problems now. Maybe we can cut him a tiny bit of slack.
Just a little bit. Yeah. No, it was that's just how it was. Apple, but that's that core of belief that Apple was likely to go under, but we all liked it anyway, and we all preferred it anyway, is quite frankly the part of the foundation of this relationship that you and I have here, right? Like, we were all in this, and even for people that have come in much later, there is still a huge sense of community amongst all of us who publish about Apple, and that, like I said, that exists to this day, even though they definitely are not the underdog anymore. But there was this community, and we would all get together, and yes, we were competitors, but we were all in it together, and the rising tide helped all ships, and we could affect the tide back then. Now we're just watching the tide, but Apple has firm control of the till there.
I'm one of the late people, by the way. I think to me it was I was hanging around.
You see yourself as late, but you're not. Well, I see myself as late too.